interesting, Liana, that we are starting to see these enterprise software companies doing particularly well. Also, just generally, the software companies were expecting much potentially of Slack, but the consumer-facing companies that perhaps aren't Beyond Meat, but are more of the tech inclination, Uber and Lyft, haven't done so well.
So these aren't household names, but certainly investors are big fans, at least this week, with CrowdStrike and then an Israeli company, Fiverr, today doing really, really well. So sometimes it's these more stable companies with a lot of revenue and a lot of growth with stickier customers that are less consumer-facing than Uber and Lyft that investors seem to be really responding to well.
Yeah, certainly that's the case, but everyone's still fixated on Slack going public, Postmates, WeWork, and Peloton when they eventually do. Slack, of course, coming next week. In terms of the companies that are on deck, are those the ones that are really determine whether IPOs in 2019 are seen as successful? Or are there some under-the-radar names we should be aware of as well?
So sources have been telling me that the pipeline is pretty strong. There's companies like Medallia, another tech company, that could be on deck. Rubrik, another one, could be a little further off. The Real in consumer, fashion, and then there's Poshmark and Peloton. So there's still a lot of names that are pretty well known and other ones that are under the radar. We'll see how Slack does next week. That is going to be a direct listing, so a little different than a traditional IPO. I'm sure you know they won't be raising new funds, but existing investors will get a chance to sell. But that should be pretty big. We reported the company could be worth about $16 billion when it goes public.
What does this all mean, Liana, in terms of the broader IPO market? Because we've obviously had some really high-profile lackluster performances from the likes of Uber and Lyft, which made us all shake as to whether or not the IPO market is really all that strong. But actually, is it going pretty good?
So the bread and butter for IPO bankers are these less well-known names, and they're performing really well, showing there's pent-up demand for new issuance. So I think this could be a good sign for the next few years. We haven't been back to those days where there's hundreds of companies going public every year, but there's at least over 50 in tech, I would say, expected for the year.
So as well as CrowdStrike is doing today, one thing that it has in common with Uber is that it's not profitable. How many of the companies that have gone public, are going public this year, are actually making money, or actually have a positive bottom line?
At least CrowdStrike and Fiverr, the ones this week, are not profitable. So that's not great, but it shows that investors are willing to bet on growth. Slack, for example, it's growing 50% a year. So it's really hard to capture growth right now in the stock market. So people are excited to have companies that are growing so quickly, even if their bottom line isn't so great.
Yeah, perhaps willing to overlook the lack of a profit for now.
Exactly.